Yes, it's wonderful to have all of you folks back to discuss The Design Way by Harold Nelson. We are actually coming to the last quarter of this sequence. And today we are going to be talking about interpretation and measurement. Folks, if you have comments about the chapter, go ahead and type in an exclamation mark to talk about what you got from the chapter. All right, we're going to start with Zheng. Zheng, go ahead.
Yeah. First, I want to apologize because we all got cold symptoms. Not sure if COVID or not, because testing center are full. So I didn't have a chance to do the PPT, but I did read through the book. So I want to talk quickly about it. So this chapter, I think, luckily is not very difficult comparing all the other ones we have read before. So it's about interpretation and measurement. And they mention about every design is unique and complex. In order to create a new design to the world, to add to existing world, we have to understand, know what is exist. So then there's an interpretation of what's in the world. And they mentioned about 3 different ways to interpret the method approach. One is scientific method. The other one is intuitive approach, which include the feeling, intuition, and instincts. Then the third one is through higher power spiritual experience. Then they mention about in the real, understand about the real, because the complexity is very overwhelming. And so it's very hard, like we mentioned before. It's almost impossible to get all the data we need in order to have comprehensive understanding of the world. And also when the sensory experience actually is all filtered through our sense, so it's not very objective, then there's a second-hand information also not objective. It seems it's almost impossible to have very objective understanding of the world. Anyway, so when we need more like holistic approach, basically a combination of the both scientific method, and also is very important when we interpret the world is the judgment. They mentioned the judgment is the key during the interpretation of the world. It's kind of like, then they mentioned about there's 3 different interpretation during the design process. The first is the design interpretation is appreciative judgment. So it's kind of like a pick and choose what to be considered, in what way, which to basically differentiate between the foreground and background, what's important, what's not important, what's valuable, what's have little value. I think to make it more relevant, I can think about the example is like when we design a building, like in a background, there's so much going on in the background. We have to pick something we think is most valuable in that background, to design our building. For example, if the site have water view, that could be our potential focus about what's most important. We want to take advantage of that natural resource of this site. Or if the site have no water view, but have a lot of trees, like maybe we want to focus on one of the tree, which have very beautiful tree we can see in the house. So it's kind of like we have to abstract from this data of the existing condition, find some focal point or some highlight we want to focus on. Then we can kind of like create the right through that kind of focus of existing condition to create our design. That's my understanding about, how we interpret, make the judgment to interpret the site, the condition of this existing world. Then after that, then there's they mentioned about another process is the interpretation process. The second one is a possibility, kind of meaning making. So this through brainstorming all the other stuff, you create all these possibilities. And the third one is about composition and creation. So this kind of also another interpretation after, so first is understand the background. Second, the interpretation of all the information. Then we kind of like brainstorming all the possibility. Then the third interpretation is like how we make connection between all these things. Then we create kind of our own assembly to form the relationship. That's my understanding about this chapter. Then they gave a more solid example about how to measure. So there's a different way of the example about the different way of measurement of life. So there's standard of life, way of life, quality of life, and spirit of life. He didn't focus too much on spirit of life, but the first three gave more detailed example on this chart. And I want to share my understanding of this is by listening to the book Cook. They actually mention about the food and how I found it quite interesting because they said how the nutrition was so developed. Now we understand, we don't see the food, we see the element of the food. When you read the labels of the food, it's all different, element. The problem is like the element of food don't really tell you the quality of the food. So you could have both vitamin C, but it's in a fresh fruit, in a farm, is organic. It's very different from you have the same apple or maybe a composite vitamin C, which is they have the exactly same compound, but it's very different nutrition and very different when you go to the body, how you absorb it. I think that shows the difference between the standard, the way, and the quality of life, because the scientific measurement usually is not give you the big picture, the whole picture. And also the book Cook is highly recommended, talking about how food is not just about eating, it's a lot about the culture and how the families sit together, talking about the table manners, sharing stories, which is all lost in America right now. Is everybody have their own packaged food and eat it on the run, which is very different life quality. So I think the book Cook actually really explains what this chart about, the quality of life, way of life, standard of life. The standard of life is standard of cooking is more about the labeling. Then the way of cooking is how you eat the food, how you cook the food, and the quality of life and how you sit together, cook a nice meal, fresh food with a lot of nutrition, and the family share the meal together. It's very different. I think that's what I learned from this chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Zheng. And I have to tell you this, there is a museum here of Chinese culture, and they had a special exhibit on Chinese food in America. And one of the parts of the exhibit was actually a cooking counter. So you could buy food, basically buy these timed entries, and you would sit there and the chef, as he cooked various dishes, would explain to you the ingredients, the history of cuisine, the cooking preparations. It was something really, really remarkable to kind of give you the entire cultural context behind the food. And I learned so much about Szechuan peppers and the special effects they have on numbing your tongue and a lot more. So thank you. All right, folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to talk about what you got from this chapter. Joe, you're next.
Yes. So yeah, thank you, Zheng, for that introduction. And captured a lot of the main points, I think, where we were looking at the scientific, the intuition, and the higher power. And I see this chapter along the lines of the same as judgment, where we were trying to raise design judgment to the same level as intuition or as rational thinking. So we were kind of trying to develop this skill that would allow us to interpret and measure things appropriately. It's similar in nature, and judgment is a really big, important part about important part about this particular chapter. One of the things that I had taken away is just how important it is to have your desiderata set up properly in this process, because because that's the way you're going to know what you're measuring against, so that you have this desired state to begin with. And you really start to look at what metrics may be important to you and what metrics may not, or what measurements may not. So one of the examples that I thought about was just one example that Chet Richards from the OODA Loop had actually shared with us with Toyota, where a lot of manufacturers were measuring things like costs, and they were looking at the manufacturing lines in different ways, and they were mostly focused on dollar values, whereas Toyota looked at it just from a delivery time, from an order to the time that it actually got to the customer. And that's what they really focused on, because if they could actually limit the time, they know they would be limiting the costs, and they would actually have a way of measuring things a little bit different. And that would be a way of maybe looking at, you have your desired end state, and you have a different way of measuring what than say other people, than your competitors in a particular situation. The other thing that I kind of looked at closely as well was the three areas that Zhang had already noted, but I specifically looked at when it came to interpretation and measurement, when the graph on housing, and how people may actually value that differently and for different reasons. The person may want a specific type of house, but they would be willing to negotiate with trade-offs based on whether their children are going to school in a certain area. What are these other factors that they actually like to live in? Do they have an attachment to the home itself? A sentimental attachment? Are there things like communing? All these things, when you're going into measuring what the value of something is you have a different way of interpretation and measurement that may not be something as boilerplate as having a scientific way of calculating the value of a piece of property itself. And that's something that I had witnessed as well when I was looking at how people valued properties in general. Sometimes they were completely irrational, and they had their own methodologies as to how they approached those things. And there was one other example that I had, but I'm actually kind of forgetting it at the moment. So, but in this particular chapter, more than anything, I just really kind of grasped more the importance of the desiderata, and understanding that is going to drive your judgment and your measurements, whatever measurements you're going to use in the future.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Evanik. Folks, if anybody else wants to share what they got from the chapter, go ahead and type ! Evanik.
Yeah, so one of the things that I got from the chapter is the design in figure 6.1. It's the design, interpretation, and meaning. And in that chart, it talks about, in the column purpose, it says explorative interpretation, and the outcome is finding meaning. Generative interpretation, and the outcome is creating possibilities of meaning. And compositional interpretation, making meaning. And I was thinking about the point that was like that made me interested in this was how we create meaning out of a design, and out of an interpretation of the design. Because if you're designing something, it has to mean something. Like, what are you trying to do with it? Or, what will it mean for either yourself or for the community? And I think these different types of meaning, or ways of meaning, I guess the outcomes, like especially with finding meaning, when you're doing an explorative interpretation, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the meaning in the design of either a program or a building. Like, what will it mean for the company, or what will it mean for the client to have this building being built? Like how will it function? What's the purpose of it, so to speak, is another way of saying what's the meaning of it. And for the generative interpretation, creating possibilities of meaning, I think that's more of a creative, like taking something out of chaos type of deal, because when you're creating possibilities, you're creating something out of nothing or something out of imagination, and you're imagining what that meaning, or you're giving the design meaning. So it's kind of like when you're creating a plan, you're creating what meaning you want out of it, or the desiderata. And then I think when you're talking about compositional interpretation and making meaning, I think that's kind of the same as, well, I don't think it's the same as, I think you look at something and you make it mean something, and another person can look at that same design and make it mean something else. So even though the designer has a meaning that they're thinking about, a person or a client could look at the same thing, the same model, the same plans, and take a completely different meaning out of it. So when you're using interpretation to measure, I guess, the effectiveness of the design, I guess you're looking at not only did the meaning of the designer come through, but also did the meaning of the client come through. And if they're different or if they're the same, and even if the meanings are different, if both people are happy, then, or pleased, or got their desiderata, then it was a success. So I thought that was just interesting.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Mike.
Yes, I was initially drawn to the interpretation side of things, felt like a more subjective approach to anything that we were designing. And then suddenly, matter of fact, even as close as a half hour ago, I started to focus more on the men and women who are responsible for accuracy, whether it be in architecture or, you're getting a plane in the air, for example. Those numbers have to line up. And there's, I guess, so many industries we could talk about where accuracy is so important. And I called my brother, who's a precision machinist, and for a long time he was designing these two-pan balances, which were so accurate. Manufacturers were using them to blend gases, which to me just blew my mind. Like, how do you blend a gas? But it has weight, right? And he explained to me how you take a standard weight, say something that's 10 kilograms, and you put it on one pan. And then you take something else that he called a tare weight, which is an approximation of this standard weight. And then with just some tweaking, you can bring that two-pan balance to flat zero. And then you take one side off and put something else on, and you just measure the distinction between the original standard. It's sort of like a triangulation. And it's kind of an old-fashioned way, but it's so accurate that you can actually do it with gases. If you had two gas tanks on and then start infusing gas into another tank, you can measure. And I asked him, I said, well, how accurate are you? And I'm looking down at my notes, and he said, if I had a 10 kilo balance, I can come within 1/10 of a milligram. Whoa. I was like, what? And like, I knew in the machine shops, like a thousandth of an inch is possible, and even smaller if you have something with really tight tolerance. And I used to joke with him when I worked in the shops, my tolerance was plus or minus 500 thousandths. Now, if you're not laughing at that, you've never worked in a machine shop. If you are laughing at that, you know that you don't want me running your lathe or machinery. But the point of all of it was, I was so fascinated by the way he explained the process. And it just gave me a great appreciation for anybody who is responsible in the design process for the accuracy of the design.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, folks. We are now going to do breakout rooms for about 20 minutes to discuss our thoughts on this. And when we come back with the best question that we have. In the breakout rooms, rules are very simple. Keep on topic. I'm going to go to Douglas in a minute, and then we will go to the breakout rooms. Keep on topic, be brief, and be courteous. Speak your mind, but do so courteously. All right. Next up is going to be Douglas. Douglas, what did you get from the chapter?
Okay, well, the whole thing is, when I've been around to a lot of different people, I was thinking about some other thing that was coming to my mind, if that's all right to mention, and that is customer service. How important customer service is, okay, and how important it is to be direct. DeLorean put out a car so many years ago, and he couldn't sell any of them, okay? He just didn't have the right approach. And this is what tells me that if he had probably the right approach, it may, even though it was a terrible car, okay, he may have been able to sell it and not have that problem. If you remember the DeLorean car, that was out there about 20 or 30 years, so many years ago, and he put it out there as the best car and everything. So to me, what I was thinking about, I said, so directness, compassion, capability, it may sound like a whole different chapter, but these things resonated with me. That's why I'm mentioning it sometimes, okay? Because you get all these other people going to say right from the chapter. I want to say, when I think, about certain things that come up. So that's why, I may be all over the subject and say, wait, what book is he in, or what is he? But, that's, type of thing. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. All right, folks. So we are now going to do breakout rooms for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So we get to discuss this amongst ourselves. And when we come back with the best question you have. The facilitators today are going to be Evanik, Mike, and Kavita, starting the breakout rooms now.
Quantitative Master better. Mm-hmm. And I, as a designer, I think I prefer the qualitative way better. As I mentioned, because when you deal with number or theory or computer, it's not in real world. It's easier to measure with this more abstract way. But when you deal in reality, it's more people's experience is more holistic. Like I mentioned, for example, you measure a house, is that a good house or bad house? This could be a sustainable house, have all the great data, but when you look at it, it's ugly, it's terrible. So in the end, it doesn't work in that way. The same thing as food, you can look at the data, all the nutrition, but it's not working. When you taste it, it tastes bad. You don't want to eat it. So I think in real life, the qualitative, as human being, we are three-dimensional, we have feeling, the number doesn't really work. We don't live in abstract digital world in reality.
Wonderful, excellent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide it into two sides. So first, the general question of when do you use qualitative? And then I'm going to flip the question. The next question I'm going to ask, when is it that you have to be quantitative? What is the power of quantitative? That's going to be the question coming up. But right now the question is, when do you use qualitative? When do you use quantitative? And what's the relationship between them? Joe, followed by Tommy. Joe.
The most perfect person to answer this question would be Rupali, by far. Like, running a school, when to be qualitative, when to be quantitative. She really, really understands this. I think you're qualitative when you're coming up with your desired state, whatever your ideal is. And you're not necessarily going to have constraints that you want to put on those. And then you can start to iterate from there, and you can start to see what's possible from there. That would be my way of looking at it qualitatively first. And then you just have to really work very hard on saying, how badly do you want to get to that desired state? And even if you're going to look at something quantitatively, you can be very precise on how you want to look at it in order to achieve your goal. And I'm saying that in the sense of, we talked a little bit about how Amazon has, they had a desired state, but they didn't make a profit for a very long time. So they weren't thinking about the quantitative. They were thinking about it, but it was a measurement, but it wasn't the measurement. And they had a desire and a vision in mind. So I think that when you're coming up with an ideal and then you're trying to achieve a goal, that's when you're qualitative. And then eventually you become quantitative after the fact, after you've achieved your vision or things along those lines.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Tommy. Tommy, go ahead.
Okay, hi. So I think I mentioned in the group that I'm kind of new here. So to answer about when we use the qualitative approach, I think this qualitative thing, I think it's more about receiving information. And I find it hard to separate the two, you know, to just talk about qualitative now and talk about quantitative later. But just I will focus on qualitative. I think I should interject as well that I think like the quantitative approach is about taking a risk. There are many times that I actually plan things out because I'm a planner and I never actually use the plan because I find it to be unrealistic. And I think the qualitative part is feedback. So there's risk and there's feedback. Feedback is when you're taking information about the way things are. It's really about responding to sensations, right? It's less of your mind, just more of taking in sensations and doing what you can with that feedback so you can have better design. Yeah, that's the separation I would make.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Tommy. Next up is Kavita.
For me, when I would use qualitative and quantitative versus quantitative, I would just say it in like few words. Qualitative, it would be for a long-lasting effect, for a long-term gain, versus a quantitative is for just for sustainability. You know, that's how I would use it.
Okay, let me go ahead now and flip the question. Say, what is the power of quantitative? When do you absolutely need to use it? What does it do for you that qualitative does not? Whatever context, you can specify the context, but in the context where quantitative is useful, critical, really takes things forward. How would you define that? When is that context and what does it do? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to answer. Joe, followed by Kevin. Joe.
So I think what it does offer is a sense of reality. If you're going too far off in one direction and you're trying to build something and spending so much on it and you think this is the way to go, at some point having those quantitative numbers, those constraints are going to, you know, give you an indication that things aren't just going in the right direction. Your vision skewed or something is off. I think that's when it's kind of most necessary, is to kind of, it does serve as a check of sorts. It shouldn't be the only measurement, but it should serve as a check as to what direction you're heading. That's when I would use them. I'd always use them as a measuring stick, just not my only way of making a decision.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Kevin, followed by L. Kevin.
For me, it's when a stage you need the detail, get the job done. The measurement implementation stage. Yeah, you have big picture, but when you do it, you need the detail, get it done. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a profound question. Next up is Mike, followed by, L, Mike, and Cheng. L.
Yes, I would say that the quantitative would be the design parameters. We have to establish parameters of design, and then toward the end of the product life, the reevaluation after having established qualitative initially. So reevaluation at the end, or like testing, like degrees of freedom, things like that. So.
Well, thank you. Next up is going to be Mike, Cheng, and Douglas. Mike.
I think whatever field you're in, the consequences of a mistake that you make in that field, the closer those mistakes affect life, literally life and death. For example, in medicine, I think the quantitative side of the decision-making is paramount and takes precedence over the qualitative. I don't know if I'm phrasing that correctly, but the closer you get to the importance of your mistakes could mean somebody's life, I think then you're going to really start hitting on the quantitative side of, accuracy and measurement.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Cheng, followed by Douglas. Cheng.
Yeah, I think you mentioned about the qualitative setup, kind of the ideal stage. I think the quantitative set up the baseline. So you need a baseline of what minimum need requirement you need to meet. For example, education, you need certain percent of people be able to read, write, and that's a baseline. Then the other qualitative is more like ideal stage. So baseline is what your basic needs, but then you need more than that.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is going to be Douglas, followed by Abraham. Douglas.
Talk about an experience. I lost a friend, Larry, in the Surfside thing recently. And if they had been more qualitative and they looked into what could have happened to the building where it collapsed and everything, okay, instead of thinking about just the dollar cents and so on, that was part of the, they didn't really put quality into it, okay? And that happened when I was doing an emergency on Hurricane Andrew. The ones that lasted were the hurricane, the ones humanity, Jimmy Carter's project, when the very wealthy ones, because not supporting the situation was qualitative measures and not worried about it and wanting to make money off the thing, okay? If the people would think a little bit more, that, hey, something could happen, but nobody does. They just go ahead, just go ahead and think, oh, it's nothing, none of these things are going to happen. We'll take shortcuts, and every time they take a shortcut, it costs them.
Thank you. Thank you, Douglas. Next up is Abraham.
In order to derive the interpretation regarding whether it was quality or qualitative, we need quantity in many instances. And also modern days, we are governed by time and money measurement. And in school, scores, right? So another thing is, I heard this one is from someone that a day is long, but a decade is short. From old man, I heard. So I think sometimes we feel day to day, which is measurement, mundane, hard to decipher the meaning, quality out of it. But if you look at 10 years, 20 years, even longer than that, you can see the history and meaning and story out of it, which we can say qualitative approach. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, Marco.
I guess like when time is a factor and you're sort of like building up to the qualitative state, then the quantitative state is good to be in, when there's
Thank you. I mean, I don't think I have a good answer on it. I think you have to start with the qualitative because you don't know exactly what you need to measure. And it's only after you kind of conceptualize things, you are able to say, okay, this is what I have the whole now, and I know that there is a axis here along which I can measure. So I think arriving at a place where you can do quantitative is an achievement, and you kind of have to keep in mind the qualitative context in which the quantitative happens. But when you have done it right, the quantitative is critical. Like, I'm on the 11th floor of a skyscraper. It is held together by a lot of quantitative work. And that is crucial. There is, so, you know, I don't want to put down quantitativeness. You can't really do, you know, it's a critical part of our world. You know, science depends on it, technology depends on it. But it happens in a context, and you can't try to do it outside the context. Next up is Abraham.
Yeah, I'm teaching mathematics, and that's my job. I'm interested in philosophy too, art too. But interestingly, excuse me, the what we call the agreement, fundamental agreement, whether you call it axiom or the postulate, those are defining agreement. So after that, we can do quantitative things, simply put. But what are those axioms are the realm of philosophy? So it's art, it's a qualitative area. So I think they are dancing around, yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Abraham. Now I have a couple more questions that other people had put, but I'm going to give you one more chance of putting more questions on the table based on whatever you've heard, whatever comes to your mind. Let's do one more round. If you want to put questions, I'll combine them with the questions already put in, and then we can go from there. So type an exclamation mark if you'd like to put a question on the table. Kevin, go ahead.
What's the measurement you should care the most from designer or client particularly?
I didn't get that. Can you repeat that, please?
Like a measurement unit, for example, time, quality, or quantity.
Mm-hmm.
Which part you care the most?
Oh, wonderful. Okay. What should you measure, right? What should you measure? Very good. Okay. Anybody else wants to put a question on the table? Okay, let's go ahead and Marco, go ahead. What's your question?
Like, how do you create meaning when you have to like follow the rules, or you know, you can't like when you need to like go by the book, basically.
Wonderful, meaning and going by the book. Okay. All right. So let's take the question of there is some questions. One question was by Evanik on the bottom line. Evanik, can you go ahead and restate your question?
Sure. So my question is, if the design is for the bottom line, you know, like we were talking about people cutting corners, you know, makers like iPhone developing different equipment that is only proprietary to iPhone, etc. If the purpose of the design is just to make money, is it really a design according to the book?
Okay, so go ahead, type an exclamation mark if you would like to answer the question. Mike, Jang, and Joe. Mike.
I'm going to jump into this snake pit and indicate first that it's all qualitative. And if you accept that, I'll tell you it's all quantitative.
Okay, please go on. Mike, I know you have amazing things to say about it, qualitative and quantitative. I want to hear you talk.
Well, this is the overall concept here. Let me humor me a couple minutes.
Is it okay if we go a little bit back and forth? This is a lot of fun.
The issue.
A lot. Go ahead.
Okay. The issue is that when you reduce something to numbers, the purpose of numbers is not numbers, but insight into the decision surface. And the decision surface there's a complicated surface with mountain peaks and infinite depth sinkholes that you can fall into.
Okay, let's go step by step. Mike, this is a great observation that the purpose of numbers is to arrive at an insight. Can you talk a little bit about that? What give me
okay. The technique that you, in order to gain the right insight, let's say you have you're an evaluator of proposals, and you got 30 proposals, and you could say they're all technically compliant with your requirements. And then you could say you simply have to pick the one that's lowest cost and technically inquired. But then you have to look at it and say, one of those.
Let me summarize it in my own way. This is great. See, what he's saying is that the purpose of coming up with numbers is to give you insight on a data. So for example, let's say I do a lot of hiring. Okay, I have hundreds of resumes that come in. I need to have a system of numbers to actually evaluate. I have to identify what are the key criteria for the job. And then I evaluate people on like 1, 2, 3, 4, or let's say just 1, 2, 3. And I have this, and on all these different axes. So you have to get the axes right, and you have to get the measurements right. And the whole purpose of that is to say who is likely to be a good candidate. So this is a good example of what Mike is talking about. Is that true, Mike?
Exactly. And you could say, well, you're going to try to decide whether to get a hybrid Ford or a BMW, that is a polluting car and might last the next 100 years. Which one is, you got to weight, the other term you got to bring in is a weighted matrix.
Right.
And,
so wait. Let's see. What happens is that the world is very complicated, and what numbers allow you to do, don't think of it as numbers. Think of them as like measuring rods. Okay, you're trying to see all the axes that are important to you. And you're trying to, like, for example, you're looking at 2 cars, right? You're measuring them along these different axes. How comfortable is it? How comfortable is it to sit in? How comfortable is the ride? What kind of speed can it go to? What kind of gas mileage does it do? What kind of environmental impact it has? And what for you and for anybody else? So this is an objective way of looking at the car. And then you can say, my choice is that I want a very fast car. I don't mind even if it is uncomfortable. Another person might say, I want a really comfortable ride. Another person can say that, I want it to be environmentally good, regardless of those things. So, but the only way they can do that is to develop these axes. So developing of these axes and making them appropriate for the context that you're working on. That is the primary work of actually coming up with those number lines. And then the numbers sit on the top of that. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Now, one of the problems you'll run into is how to compare apples and oranges. How do you compare 2 different things? And there are 2 approaches that I've used. I guess I should admit I have the scars for having used all these things. You normalize them because something is 0 to 1, and in one case, and the other is 10,000 to 30,000. So you normalize them. Now, one more thing, when you
one last thing, then we'll go to other people. Okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
All right. The last thing is when you compare unrelated things. You don't just compare the magnitude, you compare the credibility of those numbers, and you compare, and if you're comparing 2 numbers that are off in different directions, one area that helps is you compare the, you come up with a merit function, a score that's based on the square root of the sum of the squares and that of the different variables. And that between normalizing and getting a base, you get one thing. That way, one thing doesn't predominate. Like if something has gets perfect marks on some unimportant criteria, and something else gets average marks on an unimportant criteria, you can normalize them.
Thank you. Thank you. So folks, see, this is great. Mike has, actually is putting out, he's actually giving you the context of quantification. Okay, so things like you have to know what your capacity is of actually doing the measurement, the acuity which you can measure, the chance of error, and how to be aware of the patterns of error and how to correct for them. So there's all these mathematical techniques that sit on the top of it. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Next up is going to be Zheng, followed by Joe. Zheng.
Go back to Evelyn's question. I think even with the design for the purpose of making money, like baseline, still it's a design. It just maybe they have the wrong starting point or purpose, but it could be a good design to fit that purpose. So I think I don't know how to evaluate design, in a because just like you have to have a standard to evaluate if it's a good design or bad design. There's no universal standard. It's just like if the design fulfill its purpose or not fulfill its purpose. It's an evil design or it's good design, then there's a bigger picture comparison. So I think it's very hard to judge. That's what I said. You need a standard measurement to judge. Otherwise, if there's no measurement, it's impossible to judge.
Thank you. Thank you, Zheng. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Abraham. Joe.
Yes, it is a design. It just is not a sustainable design, because if you're solely looking at it from a money-making venture, that it will not necessarily sustain itself. It'll cut itself off at some point. That's all.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Abraham.
Yeah, I'll just read this one. Sorry. Wall Street Journal. This is a recent one. I shared this one with our small group. One of the best design in pharmaceutical industry is that do not kill people, but to make them addicted. So the biggest, if I remember correctly, is you can find it on the internet. Recently, Pfizer, that's the biggest one, and others pharmaceutical company made a settlement. They didn't want to be charged criminally, so they made a settlement, $26 billion on opioid crisis. So many people hooked in and killed. Doctors accomplished, they prescribed, and then so many people, as you know, killed and addicted. Still, it's an ongoing problem. But design perspective of, let's say, that pharmaceutical company, whoever did, they did a fantastic job, right? If it is not ethical issue. Yeah, I don't have an answer. Just I was informed this news, so I'm just spreading. They settle, so they will not make that way money anymore.
Got it.
By the way, this is affirming what Joe was saying a moment ago. Yeah, short term it might work, but in the long run, yeah.
Wonderful. Douglas, if you could make a brief comment and we'll go to the next question. Go ahead, Douglas.
Okay, well, it's a hard question though, I know people that are designers, okay, that do design decoration for the house and so on. And the customer, it's to please the customer is not always easy. So sometimes it's a very difficult situation. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Douglas. Next question is by Kevin. What should you measure? What should you measure quantitatively? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to talk about what you should measure. Joe, go ahead.
I think it's totally dependent on the situation that you're in. I don't think you can necessarily say there's one thing you should be measuring. It's totally, it could be one, it could be a qualitative or quantitative measurement, but number two is that it could be you're measuring time in certain circumstances. Sometimes you're just measuring quality of something. Sometimes you're measuring the cost of something. Sometimes each situation is unique. The important part is that you're able to reorient yourself and make sure you're aligned with your goals. And I think that that's the most important part. So this is where you have your desiderata as part of the your objective here, your goal. And once that's clear, then you can kind of determine what things you should be measuring around that. That's why that's critical in this entire process. You're using your judgment as to what is measured, based on your desired outcome.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Evanique.
Okay, so I was going to say something similar to what Joe said. I think it is depending on what your goal of your design and what the design is. But I think at certain points, I think quantitative helps you measure if you're hitting the goal or not. And qualitative too, I think. But I think what do you measure, it depends on what's your goal. So if your goal, for instance, is to increase, like I worked in the insurance industry, and our goal was to increase our revenue by 30% or something like that. So then obviously it would be on the surface, actually, it would be like, how much money did you make? But once you figure that out, that you didn't hit your goal, then the question is why? And then that's when you go quantitative and qualitative. And one of the things that you do is you look at your intellectual capital, i.e. your employees, to see which ones are effective at selling and which ones are not. That was one of the things we would actually look at. And then we would look at why they're not being effective. And if it was something that we could fix, we would fix, because obviously it's easier to have training to fix our salespeople. But if we didn't do that, then we would have to find other ways. Is it our systems? So it was just kind of like you just keep going down and questioning, like, what do you measure? You have to figure out what it is and then measure, use measurements to see like why you're not hitting your goal. So it's kind of like that explorative thing and interpretation. And so that's my thought.
Wonderful. Kevin, what do you think? What should you measure?
I would say generous time and cost quality. I would say the value. Use one word from the whoever pay the money, you target the service for. What's value bringing in? Then you define from that way. What's valuable. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Folks, so we're coming towards the end of this book. We've got only 3 chapters left and then the way forward. So we've got 4 more meetups to cover the book. So firstly, I want to get your feedback. Now, this is a good time to get a feedback of what you've been getting from the book. And then I'm thinking of doing like 1 or 2 meetups to kind of do a wrap up or something like that. And I'll discuss with CJ how to do that. So what are your thoughts about the book? We have finished, I think this is our 13th meetup on the book. I think we did 1 introductory one. So this is like 14th. What do you think so far? What are you getting from this process? Joe.
So I've had this conversation with Mike quite a bit. And it's something like, you know, we're sitting down each week and we're trying to figure out, okay, you know, what are we getting from the book? And, you know, my goal each week is to get one thing from each chapter. And, you know, that would be quite a feat for the book. And I can honestly say that I've taken more than one thing from each chapter. So, you know, some of the terminologies, desiderata, or the ultimate particular, or iteration, or composition assembly, or how all these things, judgment, factor into this, how this fits on all together, how you know, and I can go. These are just off the top of my head.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
May I put you on a spot and say,
Please.
I'll give you a few minutes while other people are talking. And if you could just go through the chapters and identify what one thing you got, or one or two things from at least 5 or 6 chapters, as many as you can. It would be a great way for people to kind of recap things. Just rattle off things whenever, you know, just prepare it as while other people are talking, okay?
All right,
take 2 seconds. Just go ahead and type exclamation mark. Thank you, Joe. Evanique, what are you getting?
I'm getting a new way of thinking, I think. Like I said, I've had no experience with design, and I took this book on your recommendations, Shrikant, and I think it helped me tackle things that I just wouldn't normally tackle, like quantitative, qualitative, that feels really math-like to me. I think systems and the concrete is in some sense concrete ideas that I would never think about or even try to think about, because I just had this thing where I'm not a concrete person. I'm more of an abstract thinker than a concrete thinker. And I think through this, I'm realizing, like, I always knew the value of the concrete, but I'm realizing that I can think in that way when I need to. And there are times that it will help. And I think I've taken it into my everyday life and, you know, measuring things more by concrete, doing my budget in a more concrete way, looking at what is effective for me, what is working for me, what is not working for me in a qualitative way. So I think I've taken that out. I'm definitely going to have to read this book again, though, because I didn't get all of the ideas, but it's been a good experience.
Thank you, Evanique. CJ recommends reading it 7 times. I think Robert recommends reading it 17 times. So that's just kidding. But yeah, definitely all great books, you know, bear reading. Next up is going to be Zhang.
Yeah, I think this book is quite interesting. As an architect, I found I get a lot out of this book because it's much more depth. It's kind of integrated with history, philosophy, you know, everything together with the design process, which I never read other book like have this kind of ambitious. Usually it's that design or philosophy, they never try to combine it. And I want to say what I get most with my it's design as a service. Actually, that's very early with that. They actually helped me a lot with my own work because I mentioned, you know, I don't really have a lot of patience, but now I remind myself, actually it works very well. I get very patient now with my client because I understand it's a service, you know, and they need to take them, provide them with the desiderata, you know, wait for them to go where I am because I deal with every day. They don't deal with it every day. So that helps a lot. Also, the whole design process they mentioned. I think also the Robert joined this very interesting graphic. It's I really like that as well. You know, how this come together, all this opening, and then in the end, they become these solid ideas. So it just like, it's like I deal with every day, but I never thinking in this kind of from history point of view, that depth and also the process you in the depth to analyze the whole process. So I found it's very helpful for the overall understanding of the design process.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Zheng. And special thanks to you. I think the presentations that you've been doing, they have been just fantastic. They have really helped a lot of people, including myself, to relook at all the concepts, to kind of, it's a great recap, and it's a way of remembering. And those videos are going to be very helpful. People are going to go and look at it and say, huh, let me try to go through it in 10 minutes, the entire chapter. And you're doing such a wonderful job with that. So thank you very much. Mike, what have you been getting from the book? Or just you talk to only Joe about what you're getting from the book?
No, I saved Joe for special times during the day, but no, it's very interesting. At the beginning, I knew it was going to be a project. The prose seemed difficult on the outset. But one of the main takeaways is it stretched me out, my ability to look at something complex where I might read a paragraph more than once. And I realized that it was more of a personal flaw, that I'm sometimes not concentrating enough. So all of a sudden, I've now found myself a little bit more involved with the book. And also on a personal note, it has brought me back to my childhood. Again, as I had mentioned in previous meetups, where my dad was a precision tool and die maker. And the whole idea of designing anything brought me right back. And again, conversations with my brother that I would not have had it not been for the book, which I like. It's just a little mention, something that you've said to all of us in various meetups, that you highly recommend that we do our own presentations with your approval, or facilitate a breakout room. It's another thing I found extremely helpful, because I'm in there, and even though I'm not adding as much as other people with expertise, that whole process, so reading the book, having a conversation, having the ability to even facilitate a breakout room has been very, very helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Anybody else wants to share? Anybody who is reading the book? So let's see. Jeff, what about you?
So I'll offer two things. One, I'm both impressed by and enjoying that there are so many examples here where ideas and elements such as quality and quantity, or vision and inquiry and action, or internal and external, or solitary and social, or figure and ground, where they are less either or and more both and in some kind of creative combination. And second, that if you will, that it's wise to allow all conclusions to be temporary, and all revelations to be part of a progressive revelation process, because everyone and everything is always changing. And so there is no, I think there's seldom even a desiderata that cannot be influenced and affected and evolve over time. And I appreciate those perspectives, because I think they're mature, as opposed to looking for things that are perfect, as if something might be perfect and then change can't come along and affect it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Joe, you're ready. Go ahead.
So this isn't my complete list, but as I mentioned, is desiderata is pretty much where everything starts for me, but also the importance of the client and designer relationship within that process, and understanding the values and aim and how critical those two things are. When you're basically both on the same page, you're both working together. And that's something that is that I've taken from each one of these chapters. I also look at design as a service, is a very important part for me as well, because it doesn't ignore the individual. It doesn't ignore the imagination of the designer, but it does keep it within the context of the stakeholders and the end users. And so I really appreciated that part about it as well. The ultimate particular is actually something that is really crucial as well, that it's a constant iteration of a process, and that, that each situation is going to be unique. And then how you take something from the true, using your constraints, and then you have something that's real, and then you're trying to get to something that's ideal. And that process is really important for me to understand. Sometimes when we talk about a lot of these design projects now, they just do fail fast. I don't think that they actually capture that part of the process in this, when they're talking about what is true, what is real, then what is ideal. They're just trying to get to the finish line. And I think that this is where the kind of the artistic end of this book and the not only just looking at it from a scientific or mechanistic point of view has really been beneficial for me too. This book also looks at, I find to be one of the most important part is the composition assembly, where you look outside of the domains of something to see how you can reassemble and create something that is then useful for other people. And then that really connected with me when I was talking, when we were the epistemology presentation, where we looked at the 4 domains and we came up with the idea of the snowmobile. That was a very real thing. And then you have to start to look at parts, and you look at the whole, and then you look at, how to look at parts outside of their domain to see how they can create something new. The importance of judgment, raising it to, again, I mentioned this before, raising judgment to the same level as our maybe rational thinking is a very important part as well. Because sometimes we just put a little bit too much into rational type thinking, and it kind of closes off our mind, and not enough thinking about what it means to have judgment from a design perspective. And just the idea of the whole, that's really important. One of the things that I even thought of this evening was, okay, if I were to look at the whole, and we were talking about measurement, what if you're talking about a society? What would you look at? You wouldn't look at only economic numbers. You look at all of these other things that go into place as the whole, because you're really kind of trying to evaluate something. And that is interesting when you're talking about interpretation and measurement in general. I thought the evil of design was a very important chapter as well, because it categorizes the types of evils of design. It doesn't necessarily just say this is bad and this is good. And I think that having a more nuanced approach as to why evil design exists in the first place is a really important thing. Sometimes it's done by a lack of understanding, out of pure ignorance. That's a very important lesson for me to learn, because it allows you to, proceed with a little bit more caution and to mitigate risks when possible. And again, this is not a comprehensive list. This is I could have gone through, if I went through my main copy book, I would have had a little bit more. But the true, real, and ideal as well it's a very powerful thing to consider. The other one I didn't even include was digital and analog is another very important point that I see going forward when you're talking about designing new solutions, that understanding that is going to be critical when you're coming up with an optimum or an ideal solution for a problem, because all too often we look at something as just being automated and separating people from the process itself, and that somehow is an efficient way of doing something. Well, it may be efficient, it's not effective. So anyway, I'll stop there. I've been talking for a while.
Joe,
So I get a lot from it.
Joe, that was just great. That was just great. I mean, it's just the whole range of things. And I think you have a unique advantage, both that you had a good preparation, thanks to all the meetup that CJ had done and you had attended. So you had a great preparation. You had kind of familiarity with the book for a long period of time. Plus, you're kind of involved in design of various kinds. So you have a lot of kind of experience yourself, and then you're able to engage in a deep way. So thank you. Thank you very much. Great example.
And Robert's graph last week was very, very helpful for me as well.
Yes. Yes. So we got 2 votes for Robert. Anyway, Brian Allenby, you're usually very quiet, but whenever you have observations to make, they are very deep and very direct and honest. Would you like to talk about what you've gotten from the book?
Well, as I've said a couple of times previously, I don't actually get time to read the book at the moment. And I get my sort of pleasure from this series by listening to people's comments. I gain a great value from people, certainly like Jen and Joe, as they sort of go into great depth. And that's where I'm getting my value. I tried this week actually to read the chapter. I failed miserably, but I will read it, but at the moment it's quite a number down on my reading list.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. I mean, I think, folks that we have here, they actually do pretty good job of picking out topics, concepts from the book that mean a great deal to them, and they are able to fully explicate them. So even if people have not read the book, if you have deep interest in design, I think you can get a lot from it. Not only when Zheng is, of course, out there in terms of how systematically she brings everything together, but everybody who comments actually brings a lot. So thank you very much, Brian, appreciate that. Anybody else? Kevin, are you reading the book?
Yeah, but it didn't word by word. That's my style. Let's give little index, and yeah, it's great. It's a good book. Yeah, there you look for design, and yeah, I agree. Read it later. Yeah, it's bringing so much topic and so much thinking. Then one thing I do like this book, not a normal product. I normally sell product like this iPhone on the tell you one side. It's good. It's definitely it's good. It didn't tell you a side effect or cascading effects, but it's designed this. Yeah.
Okay. Great observation. Thank you, Kevin. Let's see. Does anybody else like Marco? Do you want to share what you get from the book? Okay, if you want to share, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark. Go ahead.
No, just the importance of the whole. That was the biggest thing for me. And seeing things in general, in life, just seeing the big picture rather than just focusing on the details.
Thank you. Thank you, Marco. Mike, what about you? You've read so much, and what are you getting from this book? Mike, are you around?
Which mic are you referring to?
That mic, the magical mic. Go ahead.
It's obviously a good book and well written, and I got a better understanding of what what the issues are in design. I've been on the fringes of design my entire career, and probably the next half is going to be even better because I read the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Now, others, I do not know if you have read the book, but if you would like to comment at this point, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark. Even if you have attended just a few meetups, what you've gotten from the discussions, as Brian was saying, that you're able to, you can actually pick up a lot from just listening to the meetups. If you have attended multiple of the meetups, go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to share at this point. I'm going to give 10 seconds and then I will move on. All right. Okay, folks. So the next chapter is going to be craft of material. And then we have systemics, guarantor of design, and then the way forward. And then I will figure out a way of doing like 1 or 2 meetups to bring everything together. So whatever Joe did today, I would encourage you to do that. Of just go through the notes for the, for the catch up. Maybe we'll combine that with a way forward because it's pretty short. Or we can do it as a separate meetup of just try to go through the chapters, your notes, and say, what did you get from it? Try to condense it as much as possible so we can, we can have a discussion. All right. So the next one is going to be craft of material. And so that's the plan. All right, folks, thank you very much. And Happy New Year to everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Jane.
Howard.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
I hope you guys feel better.
Thanks especially
Thank
to
you,
Jane
Mike.
and Joe for
Yeah, and I had more. I had a lot more I could have gone.
I had a lot more. Don't worry. We'll give you plenty
Okay.
of time.
Thanks.
All right.
Be well.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.